gavel for this one too.
Okay.
Good evening. The January 24th, 2022 Policy Committee of the School District of Haverford Township is called to order. Let's rise for the pledge, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now will you turn it over to you or Ms. Shaw?
So this evening, the policies that we're going to start off by taking a look at are in that section 000, local board procedures. We have all of those policies. Some there are recommended language changes to. Some we're looking at an additional policy within that section, and we thought we would just start and go through them in numerical order. If there is no change, we would just ask the board members, is there any change that they would like to see made to the policy? If there are not any, we'll move on to the next one. So for example, the first one that we would take a look at does not have any recommended changes to it. It's policy 001, name and classification. We'll ask, there are no recommended changes, but if there are some from the board, then we would have a discussion about it. Okay. Otherwise, we'll move on and just follow that procedure with each one and see how many of them that we get through this evening. As a reminder for anyone who may be tuning into the meeting or members of the public who are here, any policy revisions would come before the full board. They would come before 2 meetings before being voted on for approval. So this will be a heavy-duty working group each time this group does meet. Any questions before we start? Procedurally? Right, as I mentioned, that first policy is 001, name and classification. Identifies that the Board of School Directors, sometimes referred to as the board, refers to the composition, purpose, intermediate unit, and classification. A lot of specific information, also address of the district. At this point in time, there are no recommended changes since that policy was reviewed quite some time ago.
I'd like to note that in my comparison that I did, the purpose, there was an additional phrase at the end of the purpose where what's posted on our policies looks like it ends with providing a program of public education to serve the needs of the Commonwealth. And the revision I see is, and specifically the school-age children of the district. No, just for clarification, but I think it is in addition to what's posted on our policies.
Okay.
If there's that addition or not, my only question is, for all of these, will we add a line that says, like, if we make no change, will we add a line that says reviewed and then the date of the revision, or of the review, just so that we know this is what's reviewed at this time?
Yes, we can have a line that says adopted, a line for when reviewed, and a line for when last modified, in the
Okay.
event that you review it and don't change it.
Right, and just thinking just to sort of, just memorialize that we met and we looked at it, and it looks good.
Okay to move on?
Yeah, that's good.
Great.
Policy 002, titled Authority and Powers, and there are some modifications that have been recommended to this policy, some language modifications, and in addition, there's a recommendation that we consider moving the language of the last paragraph on to policy 906. about what the recommended changes were.
Just a question, the age of 6 is changing from 5. What does that, I guess, does that mean that we don't provide education for 5-year-olds anymore, or what, like, does that mean it's not required? What does that mean exactly?
The school code actually does not require a kindergarten, and the age of beginners is generally 6 or whatever the age designated by the district.
Okay.
I believe your policy 201 establishes a kindergarten.
Mhm.
So in this policy, the legal requirement is starting at age 6.
Okay. I'll just say that I think all the changes suggested by council look good, and I agree with moving, this language. Just a technical question. We wanna move this to 906. We're not gonna review 906 for a while.
We can, at your direction, we
Okay.
can bring 906 in front of the next committee
Okay.
and start that process.
Just so that we sort of close the loop
Mhm.
on this paragraph, and that way it doesn't get lost. And 4 years from now, we think, "What, we haven't had this paragraph in a long time." Okay.
Yeah, I think that comes up, there's a later policy in the section that references the 900 section I was gonna suggest as well. I also see, maybe 2 typos to fix in the second paragraph of powers. The first sentence has 2 periods after it, small thing. And then, in the second paragraph of limitations of responsibilities, the second to last line as it prints out on mine, it's a superintendent and they staff instead of
The stuff.
their staff. So I appreciate one of the changes that's made throughout the policies is to get rid of gendered language. And I think this was just a they instead of a their, where that would be more grammatically correct.
We can make those,
Yep.
those changes.
Looks good.
Any of, looks good?
Yeah, we're blowing through these.
Yeah.
Policy 003 is titled Functions, and in the draft that is there, you'll see, again, a number of wording changes in there. But you will also note, right within that, right on the first page, an emergency shall be defined for those purposes, and setting out that definition there.
I had some comments on this one. So in the very first sentence, we take out the word procedures. If we're gonna do that, we need to take out the word and. But, a more substantive point on procedures is that procedures is actually used a couple more times, throughout the policy. In the second added paragraph on the first page, procedure or policy is used. The second paragraph on the second page, again, it said procedure or policy a couple times. And so I guess just wanted to get some information around why why it's being suggested to remove procedures, and if that's what we want to do, just to, make it uniform throughout the policy.
So the deletion of the word procedures is that if we wanted to be technical about it, the board approves policy.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think some confusion does come from those words being used interchangeably.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I don't have an aversion to removing procedures, let's just remove it throughout.
May I just ask a clarifying question on the change?
Yeah.
In the one indication, the added language is for a board procedure as
Okay.
opposed to a district procedure.
Okay,
And the board, as a governing body, you can establish a procedure for your meetings.
okay,
So, I didn't know if you want to remove, it's the second paragraph of the suggested language, if you wanted to remove that as well.
okay, right, so we'll see, so it looks like here, it's used board procedure or policy, and then that second paragraph on the second page uses board procedure or policy shall be recorded, and then all current procedures and policies shall be printed in the board policy manual. So do we have current procedures? that are printed in the policy manual?
No.
No, right, so that one I think we would remove, but I see the difference here. The board procedure, you can think of something like the way we proceed with our meetings and things like that.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, so there's a distinction, and so I guess just, when council's going over this again before we present it to the board, to just make sure that the sweep is done of, and that distinction is made.
I had a question, in a section that Ms. Snodgrass just referenced. It said, all current procedures and policies shall be printed in the board policy manual. And later tonight, we'll be talking about 007, which talks about access to policies. And I think it only talks about an electronic version, is that correct? So is there a printed board policy manual?
No, all policies are in board docs,
So
so we've not printed out.
So maybe in this section here, we want to correct and update the statement that all current policies shall be available in electronic format, and delete the language about printed in a policy manual.
Or can we just refer to the policy that talks about where the policies are available for viewing? Because I know that, we also provide, like, if someone doesn't have their own computer or their own internet, they can come here and view and so I wouldn't want to, I don't think we need to necessarily say that again, but maybe we just make a reference to the all current policies are available as provided in policy,
I like that.
whatever that number is.
Publicly available
Public.
or publicly available? Because that's
Mhm.
the goal, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last section here is on hearing grievances. And there's not a definition of grievances. I wondered if that has a formal meaning, or if just the common use of, to complain or to, if that's understood here.
There are policies, and one of the functions of the board is to hear formal grievances and formal hearings. We can indicate language if you wish to differentiate between informal hearings and formal hearings, or formal grievances. The question I would have is just in reminding that when approached, that the references to the administration to address the concerns of students and parents on the first response from the administration, because the board may at some point sit as a trier of fact as the hearing officer.
Right, I think, my question was just around the clarification of maybe a distinction between a formal grievance might be helpful in this case. And then in the second line, it says grievances from employees or parents, and I think we could find other language to use that's more inclusive than parents.
A clarifying question, when you say you mean, like, typically we would say parents/guardians.
Yeah, I think that would be fine. I also didn't know if grievances in this case could be a member of the public who did not have a student enrolled in the school, so it needed to be even broader than that.
I have a question for the next sentence. Reports are to be made at each level. So is there a follow-up with this question. Is there a specific format that grievances should be given? What type of report?
Yes.
Okay, and so is that clear as well in terms of what type of report is it? Is it documented a certain way, and what are the levels that it needs to be made at?
Maybe we can reference, like for each one of the employee groups, there's a process, maybe there's a way to reference that. And
Okay.
Parents, it tends to be a, complaint. So perhaps we could look at tying it to that.
Is there a way to put like the link to the website of where they would find that? Or does that not make sense because websites,
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
had trouble, we've thought about putting things in websites before, but
it
websites
changes
change so
mhm.
quickly and have to cause,
Yeah.
what the public will find out is, and Dr. Rushi alluded to this earlier, we meet in this committee and we'll talk about it, and then any change that we make has to go through two
Yep.
readings in front of the board and a vote, and so
Yep.
to change a little website would be cumbersome.
And just to comment on the questions, throughout the policies, there are various, such as Title IX policy, the discrimination policies, which outline grievance and hearing procedures with requirements. So the board may want to consider this general policy
Mhm.
simply a reference to reports as outlined in policy and regulations.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right, in accordance with board policy and
That's a good point.
law, applicable law or something like that.
Yeah, I think these comments are helpful in understanding how, someone who isn't familiar with the workings of the district system may interpret or, react to this, and, yeah, these kinds of questions, like, what does that mean at each level, right? So if we can make them user-friendly or, have those references that help, expound on some of these, so people could, kind of follow to the next, way of kind of understanding and utilizing the policies, I think that's helpful.
Anything else for this policy? No? Policy 005 is, the organization, it's actually a whole policy is about the organizational meeting and what occurs, in that meeting, how it occurs.
I had a suggestion in the second paragraph, to just write, in addition to the 9 members, the superintendent shall have a seat on the board, but not the right to vote. Just because the way that it read, it seemed like the superintendent was one of the 9 members, and obviously that's not true if you look at any of our other policies, but, maybe just have.
Paragraph?
Am I on the right one, on 4, membership?
I think you skipped 004.
Oh, I skipped 4.
Oh, that's funny, I was on 4 right with you.
Oh, you went to 5.
I went,
Mhm.
sorry, I thought I don't have 4.
I was
I have all my
on
Google Docs lined up and I don't.
Sorry about that. So policy 004 pertains to membership, and, qualifications, term, vacancies, how those vacancies shall be filled, requirements for the board. So, sorry about that. Thank
No
you.
problem. Yeah, so I was just thinking if we wanted to add like just a short phrase at the beginning saying in addition to the 9 members, and then the superintendent shall have a seat on the board but not the right to vote.
Mhm.
Which that second half is what's being added or suggesting to be added. And I appreciate council changing his or her to their, for gender inclusivity. I don't know if anyone has any comments towards the front of the top of the policy. You can go ahead. My next comment is literally the very last sentence, so.
So the additions at the end, are they comments or these are additions? So the district may want.
Those additions at the end are language that can be found in some similar policies for
Okay.
your consideration.
Okay.
None of them are legally required via statute.
If nobody has comments on the first, beyond the last page, the first suggested addition, I agree with, authorizing student representation on the board as non-voting member. I think that makes a lot of sense to put in here. Then there's the second portion. I know, that's how it's split up on my document, sort of
Yes.
first and second, okay. And, I think that the first two paragraphs here, are perfectly fine to add. I'm just a little bit hesitant on this third paragraph, about violating the policy. It would be handled, on a case-by-case basis. I'm not sure that we need that. I know that there are other portions of policies that talk about like the removal of board members. And, I think it makes more sense to sort of leave, this type of action to those policies. It also just doesn't really mean anything, is how I read it. I guess my point is I'm not sure what it means. If others feel strongly that this last paragraph should be included, I would just ask that instead of it's being handled on a case-by-case basis, I would ask that that be changed to addressed on a case-by-case basis. But I'm interested to hear what my colleagues think about this last paragraph.
So are you saying that there's a policy that we will be reviewing in the future that already addresses the step-by-step process for this, or?
Yeah, there's a policy that talks about removing a board member,
Okay.
if they're not fulfilling their duties as a board
Mhm.
member.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that earlier in this same policy?
Okay,
The bottom of page 2 and top of page 3.
there you go.
Yep.
Yeah, removal.
Yeah.
I read a lot of policies over the last
Yeah.
week, so.
So in this particular case, that paragraph, would it be at the very end, or would we move it up to be in the removal section? That would be an addition in that removal section above,
I think we would suggest leaving it at the end.
at the very end?
Because it's not limited to just the removal of a
Okay.
board member.
Okay.
And again, this is not a legally required
Mm-hmm.
addition. It's one that you could consider at any point in time. If there's a belief a board member has violated some policy, there's
Mhm.
always a process for anyone to submit that information.
Yep.
Would these two additions have their own headings in this section? Like I can imagine student representatives being one for the first and suggested language. And then would this be called civility amongst board members or something like that?
Could be. Mhm. Could be.
Can we go back to the sentence that, Ms. Snodgrass was referring to, policy violations will be handled on a case-by-case basis?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I'm also stuck on the word handled, and I am not sure if that's the appropriate word that we want there, because essentially, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It probably means addressed. I think so, I would think so, looking at it.
Handled isn't the right word.
Handled
Yeah.
is, maybe has more of a negative
Yeah.
connotation
Yeah.
to it as well
Yeah.
than.
Seems very pejorative.
And I think I do like the idea of addressed, or another word that could be suggested, but I'm also hoping that there are specific measures that are used to address policy violations somewhere. Or is this something that's just gonna be quote, handled along the way? Like, is it very clear this violation will equate to this specific consequence, or this specific 1 to 10 things that must take place?
It's not really, if there's a violation of policy, there's not necessarily a specified concept, like a
Right.
student code of
Mhm.
conduct
Right,
might have.
right.
Right. There are, in addition to the, as outlined in this policy, the criteria for potential removal of a board member,
Mhm.
the board, in its inherent power, can take action against a board member, if you want to use that language, such as a sanction but those are in very egregious situations.
Mhm.
So I think that, again, there's nothing that's legally required. So you could remove this entire paragraph
Mhm,
if you
mhm.
wish,
Mhm.
and it would neither increase nor decrease any ability or authority you would have to address a situation if a board member were to be openly violating a policy, to address it by having the chair, the president, and the vice, and the superintendent having a conversation with that board member. But it would not present to you if you were to violate this policy, here's the result.
Mhm.
It would give the flexibility to address it on a case-by-case basis. But again, you can remove that entire paragraph, and it'll
Okay.
have no impact on this policy.
I guess I'm sort of thinking, if person A violates the policy and then person B violates the policy, will person B say, well, you handled mine differently than you handled theirs because there's no set criteria in which we are supposed to follow. But you're suggesting that removing this language would allow more flexibility, but does it then make the board more vulnerable if there is a violation?
From a legal perspective, I do not believe it would make the board more vulnerable.
Okay.
I think it falls into one of those categories of the attempting to identify all possible violations and to legislate consequences is too large of a universe
Okay.
to think of that. I do
Okay.
not think it would put the board in a legally vulnerable position.
Okay.
Yes, my question on this section too, it says individuals who believe that a board member has violated this policy may report the perceived violation to the board president or vice president. Is that the same as someone speaking in public comment and saying, I think a board member has violated this policy? Is it the same as an email coming and saying, charging that a board member violated policy, or is there something that distinguishes a report from those forms of communication? And does this section here then obligate a specific response that has some publication of how the matter was handled?
Now, if I understand the question, again, I think whether this language is in the policy or is not in the policy, I don't think it changes any response from
Mhm.
the board. It's similar to the later policies around students. Just to use one as an example, a bullying policy or a discrimination policy in the district has an obligation to conduct an investigation at that point in time. It would be similar if there was, even today, without this language in the policy, if there was a concern brought to the superintendent or to you of a board member, it would be appropriately reviewed. And it does not mean that there would be a public action taken, but it would be reviewed.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the conclusion that we seem to be coming to is to take out that paragraph because it adds more confusion.
Mhm.
And it doesn't seem to actually require any different action or have a meaningful consequence for it to be there. So, if others are in agreement, I would suggest removing that last paragraph. But I do like the civility paragraphs that come before it.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
think it's fine.
It seems to add more confusion.
I'd like to comment on an earlier topic in the section of removal where it says a school director who neglects or refuses to attend 2 successive regular public meetings, that becomes a condition, where they may be removed. Somehow, I guess I was under the impression that there was also, a, kind of a limit to how many meetings a person may miss in, say, a school year or a calendar year. This language seems to be like, okay, if you miss, a couple in January and then come back and then,
Every other one.
right, does that, that seems problematic if it's just 2 in a row, but not some cumulative, participation.
Is this what the law says?
Yes, this mirrors the statutory requirements.
Okay.
If we found, would it be at the board's discretion if there were a member who routinely did not attend, but it was to, like Antoinette's point about, it was every other meeting, and they ended up missing 6 or 7 meetings in the course of a year, like, would the board have grounds to, say the person isn't fulfilling their duties, or no?
If that were to arise, we could look more deeply into it. My initial response is that you all are elected officials, and to remove an elected official, we would want to follow the statute very closely.
Yep.
So I would caution against adding anything into this policy that's not allowed in the statute. But again, if a situation were to arise, we could look more deeply into whether there was, in a case-by-case situation, some grounds to move forward.
And we'll also be later talking about the addition of a policy to have remote participation, and that may alleviate, some of the conflicts folks may have 2 meetings in a row.
Mm-hmm. And given what council said, we leave it as is, and if an issue arises, we'll handle it on a case-by-case basis. Right.
Address it.
Yeah, all right.
Moving on.
Think so, yeah.
Now we're at OF5.
And I'm looking at the same one as you, I think, now.
And that is organization, and the organization meeting. The majority of the revisions there are wording, wording changes.
My only comment on this one was, in the appointments section, if we wanted to have committee chairs, and, in a later policy, we talk about having committee chairs. So, just something to consider while we're looking at this one. I assume that would be something appointed by the board, but maybe, I guess it wouldn't have to be, I don't know, appointed by the president and vice president, maybe. But just something to consider if we are gonna move towards having committee chairs, if that should be here, or if it would be appointed to just at the, by the president and vice president.
And we have, you'll recall, we have at our organization meeting identified who the legislative liaison will be, who the PSBA liaison, but it's actually, appeared as an agenda item on there. So I don't think there's anything preventing us, if we move towards a chair, chairs, appointing them. I don't think it has to be written here in order
Okay.
to do that.
Right, there's no legal requirement.
Great. That was my only comment on this one.
Can I just ask a question under resolutions, new language being added? Number 3, designate newspapers of general circulation. What does that mean?
Yeah.
I'm not clear what that means.
The statutes and regulations of the
Mhm.
Commonwealth of Pennsylvania have not caught up with the digital age. That might be an editorial of mine.
No.
So it follows the language of the statute to require publication in a newspaper of general circulation in this area, which you still technically are under that obligation for at least once a year to publish your meeting schedule and various other
Okay,
activities.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
If you wanna look
I
it
mean,
up,
it doesn't-
Laura, the
What?
statute's cited there for you if you wanna go.
Okay,
Take a look.
thank you.
17.
Yeah,
Thanks, Antoinette.
you're welcome.
I had a question under the organizational meeting. It says how notice shall be given to all members of the board by mail at least 5 days before the proposed meeting. And
Awesome.
I was just curious, I'm like, does that happen? Did that happen by mail? Are we required to do that? And if so, or is that another one that we have some flexibility because it's a more antiquated practice?
Even though it might be more antiquated, it's still the language of the statute.
Okay.
And I believe in the requirement. So.
And it may not have occurred this year with everything. But in the time that I've been here, it has been, I've seen them getting them ready to go out in the mail.
And then under order, I was surprised, I guess, about the oath being administered to school directors that had not previously taken the oath. And I thought we gave the oath to re-elected members too. I don't know if that's just an extra nice thing that we do, but I was surprised to have it not be at each time that you are elected to office.
You did for re-elected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just, make it like a family kind of thing. Tell them to bring their family, take pictures, they're sworn in as board members again.
I think that's another thing though, that we don't have to necessarily have it in the policy to also do it, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
But we could just do it.
To just have re-elected
Or you
board
could-
members take the oath.
Mhm. Right, but not be in the policy. It doesn't have to,
Correct.
yeah, right, because the policy is following what the law requires us to do. And so if we want to do the extra step and the board member wants to do the extra step of also taking the oath, we don't need it to say that in the policy, we can just do it.
Okay.
Right?
We can, yes, yeah.
Okay. I can't tell your eyes. I wasn't sure if you were giving me like a "you're crazy" look or like no, I agree.
And we would never do that.
Under officers, the paragraph under number 3 says vacancies in any office shall be filled by the school directors. And since the officers that are listed above are the president, vice president, the treasurer, and the secretary, I wasn't sure that filled by the school directors applied to each of those offices. Right, vacancies in any office is going to be filled by someone. I think school directors is only for president and vice president, but we would need to find someone else to fill the term of a treasurer or a secretary, correct?
I think that language, we could change the word to shall be appointed or elected by the school directors. I believe it's meant to be that the directors would appoint the individuals, not necessarily that a director would
Fill that
fill
office
that
themselves.
position.
Yep, I think that's where the confusion is. And then in the paragraph below that, it talks about officers of the board may be removed from office for incompetency, intemperance, neglect of duty, violation. This, in this case, just applies to their removal from being seated as a president or vice president, not removed as in the earlier policy about removal from their school director position.
In this policy, correct.
And are these same, are these different standards that the officers are held to?
when you ask different standards, you mean then
The
general.
incompetency, intemperance, neglect of duty violation, are those, are there a different standard to hold an office than just to maintain your school director seat?
So this policy would refer to maintaining the position of an officer, as opposed to the other policy that would potentially remove an individual from the board.
And then, my final comment on this one, is talking about committees. And the last line says, members of committees shall serve until the committee is discharged. And I think this may be something we need to consider in what we consider membership to a committee. Right now, we are operating as a committee of a whole. And that concept of specific members to a committee and kind of serving, I think that's something we should consider in this one, and then in the meetings policy that also addresses committees.
And review. Number 009, review. I have comments on that too.
Yep.
Because the language as proposed makes it seem like there's 4-person designated people on the committee, and that those are the only people that go to the committee meetings, and the only people who are allowed there, and not allowed, but, to participate. And, the way that we've taken the approach is that there will be a core membership, but that any member of the board can come and sit on the committee and participate in the committee activities.
Mm-hmm.
Can we just take the line out? Or does that need to be there for any reason?
There's no legal requirement for that language. The policy does allow for ad hoc committees. So there could be a reference that the individuals appointed to an ad hoc committee remain on that committee until the committee is discharged. But I think that's also inherent in the creation and discharge of a committee.
Right. Maybe even just add like a phrase to the sentence before it, extended from time to time by the president or majority of the school directors present at any meeting, which the need for committee becomes evident, and, continue until disbanded or discharged or something like that. So that it quite clearly applies to the ad hoc committees.
Any additional comments?
Not for me.
Nope.
The next policy, 06, pertains to meetings. Procedurally, how the meetings are run, notice. We also have the administrative regulations, and a sub-policy, if you will, about remote attendance and participation at board meetings. So there's a lot with this one tonight. And why don't we begin with the policy itself, 006. I'll give you a minute to look through the recommended wording changes. Notice additions to the agenda. That section reflect recent changes in sunshine. So you'll see, quite a bit of language there in terms of if we find ourselves in needing to add something to the agenda.
I thought that, that section surprised me being there without having any earlier reference to the requirement to have an agenda at all. it seems like there should be a statement about the requirement for an agenda before we talk about how the agenda may be modified or have additions made to it.
I wonder if it's not there because it's in the regs. So I think that got moved, or otherwise, I mean, it's, the preparation of the agenda is in the administrative regulation. For this.
But isn't it, the requirement to have an agenda has legal stipulations and instructions around it, which seem consistent with reasons why we include other sections.
The recent changes do require the publication of the agenda within 24 hours before the meeting. So we could add, if you wish, here, instead of this title being additions to the agenda, we can call it the agenda and have a statement that the agenda will be published, because that would be compliant with the recent changes of the law.
Yep.
And then have the subsections about additions to the agenda, if you wish.
Yeah, I think that makes sense and puts it in context. I have some comments also in these early sections, so I'll continue, I guess. The presiding officer is the third section. It says preside at all meetings of the board. In other place, I guess it talks about the concept, and it's come up about like a committee chair or something like that. Is that in conflict if like a committee chair may preside at those meetings instead of the board president?
If it is a committee meeting, then it is not a meeting of the board.
It's a meeting of the committee. Okay.
No formal action can be taken at the committee. So it would be appropriate for the chair of the committee to lead that body.
Okay. I wondered under notice, where again, it talks about the publication and things like that. In newspapers of general circulation and posting at the administrative offices, might we want to also have it be our policy that it's posted on our website or other kind of more commonly accessed, right? Instead of looking in a newspaper or coming by and seeing it hung up on a bulletin board in the admin office.
Or we could make it something like, and all efforts will be made to add it to the website or something like that.
Since the website isn't a legal requirement. but
Right,
it's
that's what I'm
just
saying,
our
like the
common
difference between, it shall happen because it's a legal requirement and something, we'll make reasonable efforts to keep the website updated or something like that.
Okay. In number 4 of that section, it talks about notice in different situations, and I wasn't sure what it means. So notice of a recessed or reconvened meetings shall be given by posting a notice of the place, date, and time, and sending copies of such notice to interested parties. Who in that statement counts as an interested party of a reconvened or recessed meeting?
So let's assume that part of the meeting, an agenda item, was approval of dismissal of a professional employee or approval of a recommendation for an expulsion of a student. Those individuals who are, or as you do routinely, accept resignations and retirements, those would be the interested parties because there's direct action occurring to them. It does not mean that you would have to send notice to all members of the public. That's what the publication satisfies. But if there's an individual who has a specific interest being addressed by the board, then we send notice to them that it's been moved to a different date and time.
So if we were to recess a meeting before we got to the human resources section of our agenda, we would be required to send particular notice of when that meeting would resume to all the people listed under the new hires, the leave approvals and resignation approvals, all of that.
If the action was delayed, and there's no requirement that it be by mail or certified mail at this point, so it can be by email to
Okay.
indicate, just as another example, if someone's resignation date impacts their future employment,
Okay.
we would indicate that to them.
Their
Or the-
appointment date to
right.
start with us.
Right, no, I was just surprised, and yeah, thank you for the clarification on interested parties, I wasn't sure what that specifically meant. Another topic further down in this policy, hearing of citizens, it references board policy 903. I think this may be another one we want to move up in the review schedule to be consistent and considered around this same time as we're working on these meeting policies. I'll continue unless anyone has other comments. Under voting, 1B, I was just curious about the inclusion of, it says appoint a secretary to the board of a district of the second class, a school director who's resigned their office. But that is still just referring to this board, right? The board of a district of the second class. We're classified as that earlier in the policies. I wondered why that particular language is included here where we don't make that reference in considering ourselves a district of the second class throughout the policy.
It's, I believe, just taken directly from the statute, and it's also in place so that a board member can't resign today to then become the secretary of the board without a unanimous vote of all the other members.
Right, just the additional language of, because it's talking about our board, and I just wondered why that district of the second class was in there. That seemed a little unusual given the way we refer to our board throughout the policies. And then in this voting section, in a couple of cases, it introduces like where the vote requires 2/3 of the full number of school directors. And is that to distinguish between the number 9 and the number who is in attendance at any given meeting?
Yes, and these items in this policy are following the requirements in the statute for votes that require unanimous or 2/3 or a majority.
So we would need 6 affirmative votes under a 2/3 requirement, even if there were only 7 members in attendance.
Yes.
Yes.
I have a question on the section on special meetings. This all is clear to me. My question is would there be any requirement by law to do an announcement in a newspaper? Like, that's not in here. Is that required?
Yes, we are required to provide notice for special meetings, and I believe it is under notice, paragraph 2. Number 2.
So it's not under the special meeting.
Oh, it's
heading,
not under the
under-
special
yeah, it's
meetings
under
part.
the
That's why I
notice,
was missing
yeah.
on that. Okay.
I have a question on that. Are you done with the voting section, Bridget?
Yes.
Okay. I have a question on the executive session. So I am cognizant of the fact that this looks like this policy was last revised in 2000. So since 2000, it looks like the law has changed on what's appropriate at executive session?
Yes,
Okay.
with the addition of safety matters.
Right. And so I guess my only question is, that's not like a frequent event that this type of law changes, right?
That for the ability for executive session, it does not happen frequently. It happens occasionally, but not frequently.
I'm just wondering if we should add something like any other subject allowed by law to encompass, if the law changes, then it automatically is incorporated in our policy. Hopefully it's not another 22 years before the specific policy is reviewed. But I mean, it is interesting that, the law changed on this, since it was reviewed. So, just for consideration, adding a catch-all like that.
And these last two sections, discussion sessions and committee meetings, I think that's, or the next two, not the last two, they're still student representatives, is where I'd want to think about the way that we are currently operating. If a discussion session, which was previously called a conference session, may meet as a committee of the whole, but a committee meeting sounds like a smaller number of board members meeting to work on particular topics, how that might apply to our structure, and if we might want to try to reconcile that.
I think this might go back to the whole, the potential of having an ad hoc committee as well. And so the discussion session would apply to those types of meetings, but committee meetings would apply to these types of meetings, but also if an ad hoc committee was created, it would apply to that too.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you were suggesting to merge those two, but I would want to keep them separate. But I agree with you. Well, let me see. I actually didn't have any changes to this one, even though we are acting as a committee of the whole. I found the language to be adequately broad here.
Okay.
Whereas I have a lot of changes to one of them about that. I think it's 9. Yeah, because I think this one, it's saying a majority of the committee or the chairperson may invite board, employees, contractors, et cetera, but it doesn't say that the committee is only the members who were voted on or whatever it may be. It can be committee, all 9 of us, or if at some point in the future we move to smaller committees, this would not have to be changed.
Okay.
I think it's flexible. I do think if we're going to continually refer to a chairperson, though, we should have chair people.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that aren't aligned with our practice.
Yeah.
And here's another section on student representatives. Is this where this one would be removed in favor of the one that we earlier talked about in membership of the board?
This would be removed, or it would be taken out and put into the other one? Like this would disappear?
I don't know.
Not identical.
It's not identified as that, but it seems like the two, this section doesn't mirror exactly what the earlier one said. This is talking about a linkage to the high school student being a member of the student senate and with the official voice of the student body. I'm not sure that is how our student representatives
That's
are.
correct. They do not have to be members of the student senate. They may,
Right.
but it is not a requirement.
Well, and we also have one from the high school and one from the middle school.
but multiple ones that come and report
Absolutely.
at
Mhm.
different meetings. So I think this section, if it doesn't need to be here, it would be more clear to have student representatives covered in membership than in the meetings.
Yeah,
Mhm. I agree.
and a clearer
And-
description.
Yeah, and reworked to, match what we actually do.
And then I did have just one other comment, I guess, under the voting section, and it's just kind of a grammar thing. Section 3 all starts with words like adopting, appointing, purchasing, and the other ones just say transfer, appoint, incur. So maybe those could be made consistent. And I see references here that some of these are legal citations, but some of these are just kind of funny, like, it needs a majority vote to change the location of old buildings, and I just thought that was worded funny, because I go pick it up. Right, like, you don't change a location, you may change the use of a building that's no longer, in the district service, but, you're not changing its location, actually. And then the one in here about fixing salaries or compensation of officers, I just wanted it to be stated again for the record that school board members do not get any kind of compensation from these positions. Any other discussion on that one?
Well, the administrative regulations accompany this policy. And the two sections, the parliamentary procedure, and then the second section is that process, the preparation of the agenda, which I'll start there and ask, are we looking at moving that to the policy itself?
I don't know, I mean, I'll defer on that question, but I will say that it doesn't look like this is actually the way that we organize our meetings.
No.
And so, whether this is in the ARs or in the policy, I just think it should reflect with how we actually go through our meetings.
Item 2 on there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Like
item
the
2,
headings for each, yes.
exactly,
Mhm.
right, it doesn't match up,
Mhm.
so, just having that match up with,
Right.
what we actually have.
And I think, yeah, this kind of detail is fine for the administrative regulations, but I maintain the idea that as an introduction to a section in the policy about having an agenda, yes, we will comply with the requirement to have an agenda, and then the requirements about changing it.
Yep.
Just for my own clarification, our administrative regulations, do they also need to go in front of the board twice versus the policy that needs to?
No, only the policies are approved by the board. You delegate the
what I thought.
responsibility to the superintendent.
So to me, this makes more sense than to leave it as a regulation, an administrative regulation, because it allows for adaptation a lot easier.
I will point out the parliamentary procedures has not been updated to reflect the gender-neutral language that's being used throughout the other policy changes. I would like to see that reflected in here. And is some of the phrasing in here, does this come from like a Robert's Rules of Order language, or?
Some of it does. Yeah.
Some of it's not, in
English?
common, right? In common use. Even the one about a quorum being present precisely at the hour to which the board meeting is called. That to me sounds like a 60-minute time of span that I'm like, that doesn't really make sense. I know what they're saying is that, if the meeting is called to order.
7:30, they have to be there.
Be there at 7:30, right? But like, it just seems like a funny way to say.
The meeting will be an hour?
Yes, well, then that might
Are we
be.
putting that in the
Put that in there, please.
And then number 13 has a statement about no member in the course of debate shall be allowed to indulge in personal reflections.
I saw that. That was a little strange.
That seems a little strange,
little
like if
strange.
somebody says,
In
my child's experience is this, and I'm bringing that to discussion of a policy topic or an agenda item. That I don't think that's what that means, but the language is really kind of broad on what people can bring to bear to their argument or deliberation if personal reflections is to be excluded.
Is it meant more as like, please stay on topic?
I wondered if that's what it is, but maybe we could find a better way to describe
Just like,
what,
please stay on
what the goal is.
For the administrative regulations, since this is not a policy that needs to be approved by the board with 2 readings, if people want to look over these parliamentary procedures and see what looks, inappropriate or just not in line with the way that we do our meetings and send those, suggestions to Dr. Rushi, then, we can proceed that way. Since these are really the district's, own regulations, not the board's.
Moving on.
Mm-hmm.
Still on policy 006. Now this is a sub-policy for remote attendance and participation at board meetings. So this would be new, and that's why you're not seeing a lot with changes.
And so I guess the question I have is, do other school districts around the state have similar remote policies? Are people adopting them recently? Is it, something that we're seeing a lot of districts move towards? Or?
Yes, over the
Okay.
past 5 years.
Okay.
Many districts
Oh, so
have.
like pre-COVID too?
Right.
Okay, interesting. And it doesn't seem like there would be a limit. To, how many meetings you could attend remotely.
I wondered that too, if, like the policy to be a school director requires residency, but if somebody has, what they call their permanent residence in the township, but then spends 8 months of the year at a vacation property or traveling around the world or whatever, is that the same kind of, residency and attendance at the meeting? If they're zooming in. The other question I had about the limit was, does that mean at every meeting we need to be set up with the technology and capacity to handle the potential that a board member, or here it says other necessary participants, attend remotely?
This I think has a 3-day notice,
Mhm.
so it wouldn't, if we did adopt something like this, hopefully it wouldn't be too much of a burden. It wouldn't be, day of, I'm gonna be participating remotely now.
But it
Right.
says it
But-
can be waived at the discretion of the president or presiding officer.
Mhm.
So like if I woke up today and I felt sick and I couldn't come here, potentially I could contact Bridget and say, can I Zoom in today so I can still participate? And then that would be up to you. Or who, whoever the presiding officer is.
And I think,
I'm sorry.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that's something for the district to address, how prepared.
Yeah, I also think our folks make it look seamless.
Right.
But even just look at the difference in this room and when we were in the high school last week, we can actually hear one another this evening. It was very difficult to hear, there are certain places in the district, that are more suitable. There's also technology that has been invested into this room to enable, like pre-COVID, to enable us to share quality meetings with members of, of the community. So it's possible that if we were going to be meeting somewhere else, that we would be really strapped to get something set up in a quality way, is all. I would just want that, a little bit of leeway in there.
I almost wonder whether would be helpful to have, the entire policy be at the discretion of the president. Instead of, if I say 3 days ahead of time, I'm gonna be remote, I can automatically do it, versus, is this something that's needs to be requested? Right? And so then the person who you're talking, they want a snowbird in the Caribbean, well, they would have to request that every meeting and maybe have a purpose or something, but it wouldn't be, and just like to Dr. Rucci's points, like, well, the place that we need to have our meeting in is not equipped for that. And so, I need to deny your request because of the equipment issue.
It's not by right.
Right, that's what I'm saying, something that's just gives the district, gives the president some more discretion in a practical way, right?
Because it also really affects that rule of not missing two consecutive meetings. So, yeah.
Right, it goes to, what does attendance mean? I know that in this policy, there's also, we want you to attend the entire meeting, but if you don't, we will note when you leave, right? And, is that attendance if you come to a couple minutes of each meeting remotely? So, yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant on this as it's written as well.
It also set up that the requirement to be present is to hear everything said and then to be heard. But it doesn't assume a video connection where they're able to see a presentation or, visually engage in the conversation.
Yeah, I guess my confusion was it says that you shall submit a request to the board president or presiding officer, but it doesn't say anything about once you've submitted your request, is it then automatically accepted? Or do you have the right to refuse that request or deny that request for, I don't know, a particular reason, perhaps? I don't know. I think some clarity around what the request means and reasons for the request. Because like you said, we certainly wouldn't want people living away most of the year and then zooming in just because they weren't here. But, we travel for work, and if there was something important on the agenda and we wanted to zoom in, or if someone was sick and needed to be home and wanted to zoom in or something. So maybe just some clarity around that.
For the last paragraph under authority that says the board president or other presiding officer may permit other necessary participants to attend and participate remotely in board meetings, who would that entail aside from board members? Or would that just be at the discretion of the board president and the superintendent.
Yes, who the other necessary.
Right.
I had that same question, since public comment is
Yeah.
a required portion of our meeting, does that mean
Mhm.
public comment is a necessary participant that we would also need to accommodate remote requests for? No.
No, I think the policy is written to follow requirements from a case, it's called the Milk Board
Mhm.
decision, that said it's allowable for a public body to have remote participation as long as the participant can hear everything and can be heard, so that they're a full participant in the discussion and the vote, so that they're fully informed. This paragraph that you're asking about would be a discretionary paragraph. Say if there was someone who you'd asked to present who for some reason was not able to come in, would you have the discretion to then allow that presenter to participate by phone for that presentation? Such as, just an example of Ken Matthews on a construction project,
Mhm.
for some reason was not able to be here. This would give you the flexibility to allow that person to call in for that component of the meeting so that everybody could hear. As long as everybody could hear,
Mhm.
that would be okay under this policy.
Mhm.
But if that's something the board wishes not to do, that's something we could remove. It's not legally required to allow other people to participate in that fashion.
I can see some value in having that. I'm thinking of cases where some of the doctors that we've consulted with during the pandemic have not been able to attend in person, but could remote in. So I see that, but I think for the general public's understanding of what a necessary participant is, there may be some clarification or explanation
Mhm.
there to show what the limits of that may be.
So in line with that case law, could we, I mean, do we have the right, the ability to put more limits on this if we were to adopt this policy?
If you wanted to consider other limits, we could look at that.
I'm just thinking, some of the things we've mentioned today with, potentially the request needs to be accepted by the president, and maybe it needs to be for a specific purpose. I don't know if other board members would like it to be capped at some, number each year or otherwise, and maybe we could have language in there unless due to illness or something like that. But, I think that we see we're trying to anticipate some issues that could arise with someone potentially not really living in the district, but attending all of our meetings remotely.
Right, we can incorporate those suggestions and any other suggestions I have into the next draft that would come back here.
Okay.
Just to address the concern about the residency, there is the requirement earlier in the other policy and under statute that you have to be a resident of, one, the Commonwealth, but also two, of the district to sit on this board.
Right.
So if there was a residency question, just like we have questions about student residency, that would be one of those items that would be addressed about a board member not following a policy.
Okay, right. If they wanted to live a couple months somewhere else.
Right.
We could potentially see that as a residency issue.
Correct.
Okay.
And I also think right within the purpose section, the wording there, there may be times. So that might be something to work with and kind of strengthen that language a little bit, that, this is not a regular occurrence.
Right.
Unless there's some kind of disability or chronic illness or something so like, I would want there to be language there that could allow for the president to still deem that as a possibility that someone could do that.
I also, think it's, important to reiterate that, it is permissible for a board member to miss a meeting, right? And taking time to spend with your family on vacation or traveling for work commitments doesn't mean you need to be constantly multitasking and cover, right? That, I wouldn't want this also to be, the other side of it is that, you never get to step away. Right, yeah.
Or on that vacation, you have to figure
Yeah,
out Wi-Fi
right,
strong
right.
enough to, yeah.
So this one we will bring back the next time we meet with some revised wording to it.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposal and I think has some merits in it, but, we're reworking or rethinking for our situations.
Are we at the last six?
That was the end of the sixth.
That was the end of six, yep.
The end of six.
We're at 7.
We're at 7 now.
And 7's short.
7 is short, and 7 refers to access, to the policies.
Right, this is the one we were gonna reference in that other policy.
Mhm.
Very few changes. I have no comments. Yep.
Looks good.
There is no policy 8.
Correct, you currently have no policy 8.
Do we need to make one up just so
We
that?
do not.
The numbering is generally following the numbering of the PSBA
Yeah.
policy guide. Policy number 8 is generally an organizational chart of the board of directors, superintendent. That's generally what it is. So there is none currently in Haverford. You could change that at a later date.
We have deemed it superfluous. It's not needed.
Then policy 9 is a review of school board policies.
5 years, huh?
So I had quite a few changes.
It's only 2 sentences long.
And yet,
Like
here
you
we
do.
are.
I have the wrong one, I think.
For the record.
Yep.
Okay, what's your number 1?
Okay. So, and it has to do with the fact that we are trying to include all board members, in our policy work. Board members who might initially think that policy is not exciting, might see the light, might want to participate. So I just changed I changed the second sentence or paragraph completely. So I suggested every board member shall have the opportunity to participate in policy committee meetings in December of each year. This is, I guess, something if we want to appoint specific members to be the core of the committee, then this would apply in December of each year. At least 4 board members will commit to attending the policy committee meetings, and acting as the base of the policy committee. I struck the next phrase. So I struck the board shall appoint members of the policy committee, and then I pick up, the policy committee shall make recommendations to the full board for consideration. So just sort of aligning with our committee of the whole with a core group, who will regularly attend meetings. Maybe I use the word commit, but now I regret that use. And I would instead say, make reasonable efforts to regularly attend meetings. So, what everyone thinks about my complete revision of this 2-sentence policy.
You'll send that to us.
Yeah. Not sure I agree.
Well, now I've rewritten it like 3 times, so yes, I will send it.
I think it more accurately reflects the intent of what, like the committee of the whole and so I think that's a good suggestion, Antoinette.
Is there any reason or best practice from other districts that our solicitor works with on, having it be a smaller subset of people who are committed, as Antoinette, said, but
Revised
then
to say, make
retracted.
reasonable efforts to regularly attend.
You know, just for the function, this is a heavy lift of going through all of that, and is it good practice to expect that to be done as a committee of the whole, or, is there some reason why this language about a policy committee with kind of appointed members was recommended?
Again, there's no legal requirement for the committee to be smaller than a committee of the whole. You can operate as a committee of the whole. To your question of other districts that we work with, and basically how do they do it? Most have a smaller committee to review policies of 3, maybe 5, usually 3 members, who are the policy committee. The meetings are open to all board members to attend, and those 3 members of the committee dive deeply into the policies, keep them moving, because you're right, with 9 people potentially speaking on each policy, it could take longer than tonight, but those 3 then work it through, and then when they're ready, they present it to the board for consideration, and then the committee members can explain to the larger board at the regular meeting what the discussion was and why certain language was there, with some assurance that it was considered at the committee.
And so I guess I'm thinking that with our committee of the whole, part of the reason to operate in that function was so that all of the board members could equally access the information and engage in the discussion firsthand. So if somebody isn't here tonight from the board, I think the expectation is that they would watch the meeting and catch up, so that that idea of this committee kind of fully reporting out on, you know, what was changed or the recommendations made wouldn't need to happen to that extent at a board meeting. I guess there's something to consider, again, like just, you know, what makes sense for us to operate. But I think Antoinette's suggestion better reflects our current intention, which may be something that we revisit as it goes on and see how it, how it happens. By saying in December of each year, that does give us a little bit of time, the rest of this 22 calendar year to catch up with this policy if it were to set some time for an appointment of a smaller group to take the lead.
Any other comments, questions?
And just to be clear, so this would be a totally new policy, because we currently have no policy on when we have to review and how frequently. Is
That's
that correct?
correct. That
Okay,
is
so this
correct.
is completely new. Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted
That's why
to-
we had a policy from the year 2000.
No, I'm impressed that we got through all these policies and the couple of subparts.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the work that our solicitor put in before the meeting to review these, make sure they are compliant and reflective of the current state of the law. And I also appreciate the minor changes that I think that we have discussed at prior board meetings, about gender inclusivity. Having that reflected in our policies is important. Goes to the strategic goals of the district. So thank you to our solicitors for putting in that effort.
So I have identified, just make sure I got them here because I didn't have them in the right order. I have identified to the policies in the 900 series that we're going to move forward at our next meeting, 903 and 906. 906 would be connected to, policy number 2. And 903 in connection to policy number 6. For the other policies, and this is what I just want to verify, we will make the wording changes that were referenced, and we would move those forward to the board. The one I am really not sure in terms of 006, does that one need to come back here?
006 or 006.1?
006.1.
I think we want 006 to hold, and we'll come back to policy, after, because that one seems like it needed quite a bit of work. Would be better suited to have discussion in a policy committee meeting before presented to the board.
Yep.
But 006, I think is fine to go.
What about number 3?
Number 3.
Does that ask for a review of procedures? May I just ask for clarification on what the board members, committee members wish to do with 003? If the discussed changes are more considered language that we can revise and put on for first reading, or do you consider them more substantive that you wish to have come back? And specifically, you're asking about a review of the board procedure language and referencing to 007 and the more inclusive language under hearing grievances and adding in accordance with board policy, regulations, and applicable law at the end.
I think in my opinion, those are straightforward, and we could just bring them in front of the board.
Okay.
Yep. The next item of the agenda is public comment. I don't believe we had anybody sign up in advance, but if there's anyone who would like to make a comment to the board at this time? Is that a yes? Okay, thank you.
I do reside in the township.
Could you state your name, please?
Oh, sure, it's, Sarah Fahey. I just had a question specifically about policy 707, I think it is, which I know you didn't go over tonight, but, today classes were canceled, at the middle school because of the vaccine clinic. And my only issue is, I understand that the school is a public building and it can be used for, voting or, any school buildings are used for various reasons, which I have no issue with the vaccine clinic, but if we're canceling, like phys ed classes were canceled today at the middle school because of the vaccine clinic, and it says in policy 707, basically it says that, use of the school for education should come before anything else. If you go to use of school facilities, okay. It says the board recognizes that at times there may be competition for use of facilities. The following hierarchy of priorities of use shall govern school district use, including curricular and co-curricular programming, which I believe that the phys ed class would have been. And then I think the vaccine clinic would be under number 7, non-for-profit groups or organizations located in Haverford Township or whose membership, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just basically asking if we could just, there's been so much education lost. I just don't like to see, especially with phys ed, with the masking, the physical education teachers are very limited as to what they can do, because they don't want the kids exerting themselves because they can't remove the mask. So they really lost a lot of, physical education, with the, classes being online in 2020 and part of 2021. So I'm just wondering if going forward, if we're gonna do the vaccine clinics, if we could just make sure that that doesn't violate policy 707 again.
Sure, Sarah, I'd like to have an opportunity to speak with the building principal, about that.
Okay, yeah.
Did you reach out to Mr. Haran?
No, I did not.
Okay, all right, so I will reach out to him.
Okay, yeah, and lastly, I just think, the vaccine clinic is also being promoted to the students in the school, and this is a medical decision. I think it's fine that the vaccine clinic's advertised, but having it directly promoted to the students, this is a medical decision that gets made with parents. So if we could just kind of, I don't know, there is a policy, controversial topics policy, but I think it only covers high school. But anytime there's anything that's kind of controversial, it's both sides are supposed to be discussed. So if we're just promoting something and we're not, it's not a discussion, it gets into kind of a gray area. And it's a health decision, it's not
Absolutely, and again, I would ask you to speak with Mr. Haran. As a district, we have been very careful with our language and refer to making the clinic available for families who choose. So if a different discussion occurred within the building, I would just ask that you have that conversation with Mr. Haran. I'm not saying that it didn't occur,
just reach out to the building principal. Okay, but yeah, if we could just for that policy 707, I do think it's very important that the school facilities, especially during the school day, should be used exclusively for the education of the children before we start renting it out to Springfield Pharmacy or anybody else. Okay, thank you, that was all I had.
How we doing tonight? My name's John. I live on the 100 block of Sycamore Road here in Havertown.
Could you say your full name, please?
John Giacomucci, 100 block of Sycamore Road, Havertown. So you guys all work full-time. How long do you guys take for a lunch break? 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 minutes? Anybody? Anybody?
probably varies from day to day.
There, okay, well, what's average? What's average? 20 minutes, 30 minutes? Average. Our kids are getting 15 minutes to eat lunch. 15 minutes. And then they have 15 minutes to go out and play on the out in the recess area. But 15 minutes. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I want you guys to eat your lunch within 15 minutes and get back to work. And then next week, or whenever it is next, I want you to tell me how you guys felt. 15 minutes to have your mask off, eat your lunch, and then put the mask back on and go back to work. That's all that I gotta say. 15 minutes. Thank you.
We're seeing no other members of the public here tonight. I think we're done with public comment and take a motion to adjourn. I guess we don't even have, yeah, the meeting's adjourned.